Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it, Elsa.
Excellent, wonderful. Thank you, Agustin. Well, once again, I want to thank Carlos, Agustin, the whole International Relations Office for this invitation to be here. As Agustin mentioned when he read my biography, I was an exchange student myself in college. When I was doing my undergraduate degree, I came to Chile and studied for a semester at the University of Chile. And then I worked in study abroad in international education for the first 12 years of my career. And so it makes me very happy to be here at this moment to talk about international education in the context of the Universidad Adolfo Ibañez and the connections and networks that we have with universities across the globe. So this is a wonderful moment for me to bring together my career in study abroad, as well as the work that I do as a professor in the literature department at the university. Today, I will be talking about Chile, social issues, social movements that have been happening in the past years, and also the internationalization of education in the context of the pandemic, and also the social movement that has been occurring in Chile for the past year. So I want to talk about three interconnected themes. On the one hand, the October 2019 social uprising, which is perhaps the most important historical moment in Chile since the return to democracy in 1990. This really was a monumental moment when the social uprising occurred in October of 2019. So I want to explain a little bit what happened, what it meant for Chileans, and also what it meant for the university, and what it has meant for the pandemic as well. And that'll be the next topic, discussing the pandemic. It's been a global historical phenomena. However, here I want to address how we've lived the pandemic, how we've managed the pandemic in Chile. And then lastly, I want to talk about the internationalization of education from home within the context of the social uprising and the COVID pandemic in Chile. And here I have put from home I've highlighted it because oftentimes we think about international education from abroad, while abroad. It implies traveling, crossing borders, a physical movement of an individual. But in this case, I want to look at how we can continue to encourage intercultural learning and international education from home without necessarily the travel component, even though I'm sure we all hope that eventually we'll be able to travel again. So I will start with the October 2019 social uprising. And as I mentioned, a monumental historical moment that is still in process. And I'll talk about what it has looked like over the past year, how it has developed. So if we had to pinpoint the moment at which the social uprising began, I think most people would agree that we can trace it back to secondary students, to high school students who were protesting a 30 peso increase in the metro fare in Santiago. There are many images you can find on internet of high school students jumping over the turnstiles, refusing to pay the 30 peso increase, evading the turnstiles in the metro. And this was organized by high school students, and I don't think anyone really imagined it could dimension what it would turn into, because it prompted a series of spontaneous protests that surfaced across the country, not only in Santiago, but also in many of the major cities from the north to the south of Chile. These protests were carried out as peaceful marches, large marches across the country, but also there was looting, barricades, and arson. So very quickly and without much preparation or anticipation, we saw that the social uprising really surfaced, really emerged, starting with the secondary students' decision to evade the 30 peso increase. There were a broad range of grievances that were that the people who were protesting and marching were struggling for. Many of these grievances were related to the privatization of public services over the past 30 years, and also increasing social inequality. One of the slogans that quickly emerged out of the social uprising was this one here. You can see here, no son 30 pesos, sino 30 años. It's not only about the 30 pesos, but it's about 30 years of economic injustice. And so this was really one of the unifying moments, that it was not just about a 30 peso increase. It was much bigger than that. There was a massive march on October 25th, just a few days after the beginning of the social uprising, in Plaza Italia, Plaza Dignidad. You can see this image here on the right-hand side of this iconic meeting point in Santiago, the Rio Mapocho on the right-hand side, El Edificio Telefónica on the left-hand side. And you can see these millions of people flooding into this central position in the city. It was an estimated 1.2 million people. That is the largest march since the pro-democracy marches in the late 1980s that eventually led to the return to democracy in 1990. As you can imagine, given the scope of this march in particular, the international press, and especially the English-speaking press, rapidly started to report on what was occurring in Chile. And I wanted to show you a few of the main articles that were presented. I'll be focusing on the English-speaking press. However, it's important to mention that what was happening in Chile was also being covered in many other languages and many other parts of the world. Here we have an article that was published in the Time magazine in the United States. Time magazine is a very mainstream magazine read by millions of Americans. And we can see here the date. I have included the dates of publication, October 25th, just a few days after the beginning of the social uprising, and the same day that this massive march of 1.2 million people occurred. The title that Time magazine chose is focusing on the 18 people who were killed as hundreds of thousands of protesters take to the streets in Chile. And you can see here this image from Santiago of people gathering very spontaneously to make their demands heard. The British magazine, The Economist, also within the same month, October 31st, published an article again early on. This became an interesting topic in the international press, and we can see here the angle that was taken by The Economist, focusing on the role of the president and trying to quell the unrest. And I think what's most interesting about this article is the image that the editorial board selected to accompany the article. As I mentioned, there was a whole range of grievances that were included in the protests that had to do with public health, that had to do with public education, that had to do with pensions, that had to do with a number of other basic services and raising costs of living. Here we can see, however, that the demands started to coalesce around one single pillar, and that is a new constitution. We can see here this sign that one of the marchers is carrying. It says, "We're not in war, we want a new constitution." So this is very interesting because early on, it starts to become clear that there was a unifying force around rewriting the Constitution, the 1980 Constitution, which had been approved during the dictatorship in 1980, and for an increasing number of Chileans was seen as no longer legitimate because of its origin. So we see how there is an energy that starts to coalesce around this idea of rewriting the Constitution. The New York Times, the New York Times sends an international correspondent to Chile. She's reporting on the streets, and the title that they choose for their publication is Chile Woke Up. This is a translation of the Spanish Chile Despertó, which is one of the other slogans of the social uprising. And this article looks at the legacy of the dictatorship and inequality, social inequality in Chile. We can also see this image, which I think is very, very powerful. This is a photograph from Santiago. We can see there's a barricade in the streets. The road is blocked for vehicles. There are scattered protesters in the background. The smoke emerging, which was very common during these early weeks of the social uprising. And one lone protester who seems to be quite triumphant, who seems to be quite victorious in his gesture, in his body language. And one last example, the Foreign Policy magazine published in the United States, November 23rd, about a month after the beginning And this article looks at the image that Chile had built up internationally. Chile was seen by many as really the powerhouse of Latin America, also known for its political and its economic stability over the past 30 years. And this article precisely looks at what appears to be how Chile slides into to an upheaval. So looking at that trajectory of the past 30 years. These are all very interesting articles. You can find them on Google if you're willing, or if you're interested in looking at them. Again, these were published right in the context of the beginning of the social uprising. A few of the repercussions of the uprising. There are many others that we could mention. I just wanted to summarize a few of the ones that seem to be most important for this talk. During these early months, October, November, December, frequent marches. Many of them were spontaneous, others were coordinated. Also barricades and clashes, frequent clashes between riot police and protesters. This was something that was on the news daily. The news was really dominated by what was happening in the streets. And because of that, there were many interruptions in transportation and public transportation. Roads were blocked oftentimes, and also property destruction, both private and public property. There were also a number of human rights violations that were being reported and recorded by both international and local observers. The National Institute of Human Rights was present in most of the marches and recording any of those violations that were occurring. Overall, there was a sense of uncertainty, instability, and concern for the future of the country. And this was a new sensation, I think, for many people. For me, I had lived in Chile for about 14 years at this point, and it was the first time where I wondered about the future stability of Chile, which to me, up until that point, had felt like a very safe and secure place to be. I still believe that. This has not changed my mind. But there were moments when I think we were all wondering what the next steps would be, how this would be resolved. On the right-hand side, there is a very iconic photograph from the October 25th march, the 1.2 million march. We can see this is a monument of a Manuel Baquedano, a military general, and you can see how it's been completely taken over by protesters. We can see the flames in the background, and also this young man who is holding the Mapuche flag on top of this military monument. So we can see there's a reappropriation of public space, and again, putting on the forefront demands of different minority groups within Chilean society. Here are a few other photographs, and I've selected these photographs because I think they show the range of, the demographic range of individuals who participated in many of the marches. We can see on the left-hand side a father and his son. If we were to look at these images today, we might imagine that this was taken in times of COVID because of the masks, but in fact, this photograph is from a period prior to COVID, and they're wearing the masks to protect themselves from potential tear gas. And on the right-hand side, we have a grandmother and grandfather also present in this march. The grandfather's sign says grandfathers support their grandsons, and the grandmother, her sign says grandmothers support her granddaughters. So we can see again the range of ages, the range of social classes that participated in these marches. Many of them were pacific. However, oftentimes they ended with clashes between police and more violent protesters. An important moment to mention is the November Peace Accord. I had just said that for many of us, we were wondering what the next steps would be. How would the authority, how would the government, and also the legislative body react and respond to what was happening in the streets? And so many people were protesting. It seemed like a great majority of Chileans were sympathetic to those who were marching in the streets. Not all, of course, but it seemed like the sensation was that many people were sympathetic. And an important moment was this November Peace Accord, when politicians from all across the political spectrum, in conjunction with the president and his cabinet, came together to announce a series of social reforms that were part of this peace accord. But perhaps the most important piece was the decision to call for a referendum on a new constitution. So responding to that demand that we saw in the image in the Economist magazine, that it was time to ask the Chilean public what they thought about rewriting a constitution, redrafting the constitution, and that referendum was slated for April 2020. After the November Peace Accord, there were still marches and protests, but the intensity was much less, and it decreased even more during the summer vacation, during January and February in the Southern Hemisphere, when many people were out of school and also enjoying their vacations. And so we saw that the intensity level of the social uprising reduced dramatically during those months. I think many of us anticipated and thought that as soon as the vacation period, summer vacation ended, that the social uprising would return, that it would surface again. And we see this represented here on the March 8th International Women's Day. There's a long tradition in Chile of commemorating this day, and we see here that another very massive gathering of individuals in Plaza Italia in Santiago. Many women, I think around 1 million women, who gathered here, also in other cities around the country like Viña del Mar and Valparaíso, Concepción, other parts of the country. So everything indicated that the social uprising had not lost its energy, even though it had reduced its intensity during the summer months. Everything indicated that it was going to surface again as soon as the academic year began again. And as you can imagine, looking at the dates, COVID-19 happened, and that was a major game changer in terms of how the social uprising could continue in the streets. To give you an idea of how COVID has been managed in Chile, what it's looked like for those of us who have been living through it in the Chilean context, the first cases were in mid-March. Many of them were brought back unknowingly by vacationers who had gone to Europe, who had gone to different parts of Asia, and were coming back from their vacations just at the beginning of March for the beginning of the academic year, and with them brought back COVID-19. Voluntary mask use and social distancing were encouraged very early on. However, they were not mandated at this point. In-person classes were canceled within a very few days, within really the first week of classes at most universities. It was impressive how quickly the universities and also elementary and secondary schools reacted and decided to transition to virtual classrooms really within a few days. At the Universidad Adolfo Ibañez, we had already had set up Zoom. We were anticipating that if the social uprising to return, we had to be prepared to teach classes via Zoom in the event that the public transportation was complicated. So we already had our Zoom accounts, but no one anticipated that we would be using it for a global pandemic. We had thought it would be associated to more local issues. In this context, the social uprising all but vanished. Now, I don't want to say that it completely disappeared. There were still isolated gatherings and marches. However, the massive scale could no longer be sustained given the COVID outbreak. And within a few weeks, the plebiscite, it was also determined that it needed to be postponed until early October. So we see that everything is set on hold really as the country grapples with COVID. In the early winter, I'm talking about May, June, as the contagion rates increased, it became apparent that a more robust approach was needed. And this is the moment at which the Ministry of Health decided to establish strict quarantine measures for those municipalities that had the highest contagion rates, and also mask mandates on a national level. And for that reason, most of the comunas in Santiago and Viña del Mar were in a total quarantine, cuarentena total, from June to October. Of course, these dates are relative. Each comuna had a different period of time in quarantine. For example, here in Viña del Mar, we were in full quarantine from July until October, almost 4 months. And that meant that we could leave our homes twice a week to purchase our basic goods. However, we had to request authorization to leave our homes. So it was a very, very strict measures Most businesses were also closed, but it was effective at reducing the contagion rates. And as I mentioned, here in Viña, we transitioned out of quarantine in October, right after the plebiscite. And the central government established a phased transition from stage 1 to 4, 1 being the strictest stage to 4 being the most liberal stage. Right now in Viña del Mar, we are in stage 3, which means we can go out freely during the week and the weekends. However, the massive gatherings are not allowed. Most of the municipalities in Santiago are between stages 3 and 4. I want to come back to the plebiscite, to the social uprising. I had recently talked about the November peace accord, which had the politicians had agreed to ask the Chilean population what they wanted, if they wanted a new constitution or not. Here you can see the ballots that we used to vote in this plebiscite, in this referendum. There were two basic questions. On the left-hand side, we were asked if we wanted a new constitution. You could approve, apruebo, or you could reject, rechazo. And the second question, a secondary question, what type of body would you like to draft a new constitution? In the event that a new constitution is approved and the majority of the population wants a new constitution to be drafted, what type of governing body, what type of a constitutional body should draft this new constitution? And there were two options. On the left-hand side, the Convención Mixta Constitucional, a mixed constitutional convention that would be constituted of 50% elected politicians and 50% elected citizens. Or the other option was a constitutional convention, which was 100% elected citizens. And to tell you a little bit about the process and results, I was allowed to vote in this election. The picture on the right-hand side is from the voting center where I was assigned as a foreigner with a certain years of residency. I am able to vote in elections in Chile. I was very impressed with the pandemic measures that were taken to ensure that there were no contagion during the voting instances. Social distancing, they increased the voting centers to reduce the amount of people at each center, and they also had exclusive time slots for the elderly and those who were vulnerable. It was extremely orderly. I was very surprised and impressed by how quick the process was. Here you can see on the right-hand side there was a line to enter the voting center, but in my case, my table was free, and so I didn't even have to wait in that line. I went in and voted right away. I didn't wait more than 2 minutes. So it was a very efficient and expedite process. The turnout rate was historically high. About 50% of the registered voters did go out and voted. This is the highest rate since voting became voluntary in Chile. I think in 2010 that change occurred. So we see that a great number of people did go out and comply with their civic duty. It was very impressive that day when I went out to vote with my partner. We went to our respective voting centers, and the streets were absolutely full of people, pedestrians walking to their voting centers, other people driving. The neighborhood where we live is full of schools, and the schools are voting centers, and so it was just impressive how many people are out. Of course, we need to take into consideration that we had been in quarantine for many months, and so I think that just the fact of going beyond our front doors was very attractive, but really it was impressive to see how many people did go out and participate in this process, because typically in elections in Chile, the voting rates are much lower, especially when people are voting for politicians. The results, they tabulated the results that very same afternoon after the polling booths were closed at 8 p.m. And by 11 p.m. we knew more or less the result. I think many people were expecting that the approval would win, that most people would be in favor of writing a new constitution, but I don't think anyone expected the landslide results that we see here. Regarding the first question, if citizens wanted a new constitution or not, 78.2 approved, wanted a new constitution, whereas 21.7 rejected. And in terms of the second question, what type of constitutional body would carry out the process of drafting a new constitution? Very similar results. About 80% opted for the Constitutional Convention, made up of 100% elected citizens. So we see here the pattern is very, very, very clear, and these are the national results. Next steps, in April, we will vote for the 155 citizen delegates who will represent us in the Constitutional Convention. They will have 8 to 9 months to draft a new constitution. Each clause needs to have 2/3 support of those 155 delegates. And then once again, we will go to the voting booths and we will vote to accept or reject the new constitution that has been drafted. On a personal level, my reflections after this, thinking about what was happening and realizing that I was living through a very historical moment in Chilean history, and realizing that direct democracy really worked in this instance. I was expecting that after the quarantines were lifted, that a social uprising, the 2.0 social uprising would happen again. I was really expecting that the marches would resume, the protests would resume, and we would go back to a situation similar like that of October 2019. However, after the results came in, after the plebiscite, we really started to realize that wasn't going to happen again, that the democratic process had worked, and what the people were really interested in, which was writing a new constitution, that option had prevailed. And so since then, we really haven't seen a return of the social uprising. Of course, there have been some isolated marches and protests, but nothing to the extent, nothing close to what we saw last October. So a very interesting moment to see how direct democracy really did function and how the institutions managed it very well. And now I want to come to our last topic, internationalizing education at home. As you can see, because of first the social uprising and later the COVID pandemic, we have had to transition to Zoom, and thinking about how do we continue to provide international learning opportunities from our local context, considering that international travel right now is complicated at best. Some of the questions that I've been processing over the past year, how do life-altering events, for example, social uprising or a global pandemic, how do they impact study abroad and international education in general? How do we adapt to this new scenario? How do we use virtual platforms to our advantage? And how can we promote international and intercultural learning from the home learning context? I'm going to talk about a few examples that I can speak to personally. I want to recognize that the university is doing, there are many initiatives that the university is carrying out at this moment. So I'm going to just talk about a few specific examples from my personal experience in the classroom. However, I'm sure Agustin and Carlos and the rest of the team can talk about the many other initiatives that other professors are carrying out at this moment. So different ways that we've been integrating international components into our curriculum and taking into consideration the impossibility of traveling right now. An international coffee break series, which I'll mention in just a moment, international guest speakers, classroom visits, virtual classroom visits, also offering coursework at the university in English for the first time, and also developing COIL courses for 2021. The International Coffee Break, this is an initiative organized by the English department as well as the International Relations Office. You can see that the themes, very relevant contemporary themes of confronting systemic racism, music, social movements, and Afghan youth, recognizing the anniversary of the social uprising, and also digital skills in the pandemic. These were all themes that were suggested by the students, were instances where students could listen to a native English speaker talk about the topic at hand, and then have instances for dialogue and conversation with the speakers. This went very well. There was high attendance at all 4 of these sessions, so I think an excellent way to allow students to continue using their English skills without necessarily traveling across borders. Also, inviting international guest speakers, the virtual classroom visits. This was something of an aha moment for me, to be able to finally use the international network that I've developed over the years and be able to invite individuals in the United States, for example, to visit my classroom now that we're using Zoom. So this was a way of really taking advantage or finding the silver lining of Zoom. For example, we were visited by Anthony Hill, who's a bilingual journalist who lived for a time in Chile. He's now based in the United States. He could talk to us about race relations in the United States in the context of a course that I teach about emancipation narratives, African American literature. Was an amazing instance for the students to really listen firsthand to someone who was observing the events after George Floyd's killing in Minneapolis. And also we were visited by Dr. Keisha Abraham, a literature professor. She is an expert in one of the authors that we read in my course, Frederick Douglass, and her presence was really, really wonderful. The students had so many questions for her. I think you can see from the smile on her face how wonderful it was, the dialogue that emerged from her visit. So a very interesting way for students to interact and listen to voices from abroad without necessarily having to invest in that plane ticket. Also offering coursework in English. This was an idea that was actually suggested by the International Relations Office. Many students at the university who are eager to take courses in English within their undergraduate studies. Students who went to bilingual high schools, students who studied abroad while they were in high school or did some type of exchange during high school, and others who were unable to study abroad because of the pandemic. I have a number of students in my course who were unable to go abroad precisely because of COVID. So for them to be able to take a course in English within their undergraduate studies was a wonderful asset. What we decided to do was translate an existing course into English, a course that I'd been teaching for a while in Spanish, titled Slavery and the Origins of Racism in the Americas, which we were able to translate into English. I did the lectures and the readings in English, and the evaluations and participation in class were optional. Students could participate in English or Spanish depending on their comfort level. Some of the benefits, there are multiple, but I'll mention the key ones. Diversification of reading materials. I was able to include authors who have not yet been translated, especially female authors that up until this point I had to leave out because I didn't have Spanish translations, and now this semester I was able to include them. So diversifying also the voices and the gender experiences that we were able to examine. Also the presence of English-speaking guest speakers, as I already mentioned, and then student language acquisition. For many students, really this was a great opportunity to be able to engage with their peers and with me in English in a comfortable and inviting and welcome environment. And then lastly, and with this I will close, developing a COIL, a collaborative online international learning initiative with the College of St. Benedict's and St. John's University in St. Cloud, Minnesota. We're projected to roll out our first course in 2021. This is a collaboration with English professor Dr. Madhu Mitra. We are merging a module of one of our courses. We both teach literature. We have different theoretical backgrounds, so we're really excited to come together and teach one text, one book together, and be able to provide our students with different viewpoints that we can each provide. Key objectives to, as I mentioned, to be able to provide students with comparative frameworks for literary analysis, each of us being able to give lectures from our theoretical background, and then also facilitating cultural and language exchange with our students. We're really, it's very motivating for us to be able to bring our students together. I think for them, this will be a fascinating event to be able to meet students from the United States and Chile, respectively. So this is something that we are developing for the first semester of 2021. With that, I will open it up to questions, comments. I'm really interested to know, for those of you who are here and work in international education, what's worked for you? What have you been developing over this past year? What are the strategies to internationalize education from home?
Wow, what a comprehensive and thoughtful presentation you offered to us and all of our international partners, professors, and students that have joined this morning with us, Elsa. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, your research about the late events that happen and, well, will continue to happen in Chile. So thank you again, Elsa, for your presentation. So for the rest of us that have joined this presentation, please, we have time for a Q&A session. We will receive your questions through the Q&A tab or through the chat. Okay, so please don't be shy. Ask all the questions to Elsa, and well, we look forward to read your comments or questions. We have a couple of well, there's a comment here. It says, "Thanks, Elsa, for your excellent talk." Um, and then, well, Francisco is asking also in our chat, in Spanish, ¿crees que hay un peligro que la Constitución sea liderada por los que creen que vencieron en el plebiscito? No termine siendo una Constitución para todos, sino a medida de los vencedores? Do you think there's a danger that the Constitution that is being currently led by the ones that thought that were defeated in the plebiscite or referendum, no termine siendo una constitución para todos. Yeah, it will not end being a constitution for everyone, but only for the winners? Do you have any comments on that, Elsa? This is just your personal belief, I think.
Yes, I think it's a great question, and I think we're all very eager to see how things move forward as candidacies are developed for these 155 delegates. And I think there's a sensation, at least from the conversations that I've had, that people are really looking for new faces to participate in this conventional constitution, not people who already have political careers or who have been participating in politics for the past 30 years. So I think this election in April is going to be very important for selecting those delegates who will represent us. And I think that Francisco's point is really important, that this constitution needs to be for everyone, not only for those who voted in favor of writing a new constitution, but also those who were more hesitant and who perhaps don't feel comfortable with the process of writing a new constitution. So making sure that the clauses that are included in this constitution are really representative of the point of view of the majority, of the most amount of Chileans. I think we're all wondering how this process will move forward and how many people will vote. I think that's a question I have in April, is if we'll see the same level of voter turnout in April, if it'll reach that 50% mark or not. I think it's very important that there's legitimacy in those who are elected, the 155 delegates, that they that the population feels that they're legitimately given their place within the Constitutional Convention. So I think we'll all have to be watching the news very closely in April and see how this turns out, but hopefully it's a smooth process. I'm sure it will be, and that all points of view can be included. Thank you, Francisco, for your question.
Thank you, Elsa, for your answer. Well, we have some comments here in the chat. We have one from Madhu Mitra. She says, "Thank you, Elsa, for the excellent presentation. I'm very excited about our upcoming collaboration." Thank you, Madhu, by the way. Hello. She's one of our partners at the College of St. Benedict St. John's University in the States. I'm very excited, well, she said, about our upcoming collaboration. This will be an amazing opportunity for my students and for me. I'm grateful to UAI for initiating this project. Thank you, Madhu. We also have another comment here by Audrey. Muchas gracias para esta presentación. I am working in international programs in Montpellier Business School as a coordinator for our students going abroad, and it was very useful to learn and understand what really happened, to understand and inform our future students and parents about Chile and its current social context. So thank you very much. Thank you, Audrey, as well. We also have a couple of questions here. For example, there's one here. It says, like, how was the change in the discussions that took place in classes between students? this person is asking, like, if you have not any change, for example, in discussions in a regular class today that went from a face-to-face class to an online modality. So how was the change in the discussion that took place in classes between the students? How did professors, for example, took this challenge 1 year after the outbreak? What is your evaluation? Like,
Hmm.
also general thoughts about this,
Right. I
because we
think
need to know that, well, everything has changed with the pandemic. It's changed a lot from regular, normal face-to-face modality to online classes. So you're a professor. Um, any ideas, thoughts?
Yeah, that's also a great question. And I think perhaps many of us felt a little bit of hesitation towards Zoom. For those of us who teach, I think for me, at least, one of the things I love most is being able to meet my students, interact with them, get to know them, and a little bit nervous at the beginning of the year about how will we be able to create those human connections through Zoom. And today, and now we've completed the full academic year. Just today, this morning I finished my last classes with my core students, and that was one of the topics we talked about. What did it feel like to participate in these seminar courses that have a high emphasis on student participation? What was it like for them to do that via Zoom and not in our regular seminar classes where we have a circular table? And it was interesting for some of them. They talked about actually feeling more confident speaking in public. One of the things we really work on is developing public speaking skills in this course. And some of them said that the fact that they were at home gave them an added level of confidence to intervene, to express their ideas, their readings of the work. So for some students, it was actually it encouraged them to get over their fears and timidity and participate. Whereas for others, I think they did miss the in-person component. And I think for the following year, I imagine there'll be hybrid modalities where we'll be doing a little bit online, also a little bit in person. But of course, it has really implied changing the way that we teach, fundamentally changing the way that we teach. I don't feel like I've lost the essence of how I teach, but I have had to really customize my activities to an online learning session. So the way that I taught the course last year is very different from the way that I taught it this year, but I do feel like were able to complete our learning objectives and didn't miss out on the learning outcomes that we have proposed in our courses.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you,
Yeah.
Elsa.
Thank you, Agustin.
And we also have another question from the audience. The question is that this process must be led by the political class. And in Chile, there is less and less credibility. The participation yesterday in primaries, by the way, we have primaries for majorships and governors yesterday. So the participation yesterday, that was very low, is an example. How is this process led by a totally discredited political class visualized?
Yeah, I think it's a major issue right now in conversations that I've had with friends, with colleagues, with Chileans in general. There is a great mistrust in the political class. I think this sense that been the same politicians that have been participating for the past 30 years, and there needs to be deep renewal in the political class. So I think that explains why the Constitutional Convention did prevail with 100% of the delegates will be elected from the citizens. And it does give the sense that there needs to be a deep renewal in those who participate in the political process. And even some of the younger representatives who are in the chamber, who are in the legislature, I think they are also considered to be part of this, to already be part of this establishment. And and there needs to be a complete renewal. That's the sensation that I get from conversing with people. I'm not a political scientist, and so I don't want to make any assumptions or any affirmations that are incorrect. So I will limit my comment to that. But from the conversations I've had, I think that we're going to continue to see low turnout rates for political offices, and that's why I'm curious to see what happens in April with the election of the delegates, the 155 constitutional delegates, because in theory, they should not be from the political class. They should be really from citizens who are interested in participating in the process. So it'll be interesting to watch the turnout rate for the different elections that are coming up. As mentioned, we'll be voting for new mayors and new governors in the upcoming election. It will be interesting to compare that turnout rate to the April election of the delegates.
Yes, definitely. That's, thank you, Elsa. Maybe, yeah, as you mentioned, you're not a political scientist, but I think one thing that we can all say that in the past months in Chile, everyone, I think, is looking and doing more research about the politics in Chile. I think it is one of the good things about this social change that motivated many people, including young people, to to research, debate with your families, friends, during a barbecue, whatever. I think we have all lived and experienced this feeling. So, Elsa, there's one more question here from the audience. It says, like, what were some of the challenges you experienced from moving a Spanish curriculum into an English curriculum while keeping the intended learning objectives?
That's a great question, and I will take advantage. And also, there's another question that I noticed in the chat pod by Rochelle Cito, and it's related. Yes. So I will take advantage and answer both of them. She asks if we will continue to integrate English into undergrad programs in 2021, and the answer to that is yes. And then going back to the challenges experienced from moving a Spanish curriculum into an English one, it was actually easier than I thought. I thought it would be a laborious process. Translating the PowerPoints that I had presented, the activities, but it was actually much quicker than I anticipated. The course was already well developed, and so I could take that as a base, and I modified it to include new authors and new readings, including new bibliography, which is really exciting that I could, and also movies, visual resources that were in English. I think the biggest challenge was we were on Zoom. And so there are already certain barriers or obstacles for communication, and just trying to stay in touch with my students. I had different levels. I had very advanced students who had spent time abroad in English-speaking countries who were near native speakers, and others who had a more intermediate level. So being able to reach all of them, being able to speak to those who have a very advanced level of English and others who were still working on their second language skills. So what I did in the beginning is I tried to stop myself quite frequently and ask them, how's my pace? How's my pronunciation? Do you have any questions? Are there any words that you would need more of an explanation? And so I think that reminding myself to stay in touch with the students and reach out to them, ask them how they were experiencing the lectures, specifically in the beginning, was really important. And I think that way the students were able to feel like they were being listened to, and I could slow down occasionally. They also liked doing group activities a lot. That was a way to keep allow them to interact and to keep the pace moving quickly with the course. So that really the major challenge was making sure that everyone was in sync on Zoom, and checking in with the students seemed to be the easiest way to remedy that.
Perfect. So, well, I think we are almost ending this opening conference by Elsa Maxwell, faculty member of our School of Liberal Art. She's a PhD in literature with a mention in Hispanic literature, right, Elsa?
Yeah, Latin American and also United States literature. Yep. And Caribbean. Yeah.
And Caribbean. Excellent. Yeah. So we cannot wait to see your classes here at Adolfo Ibañez, Elsa. I think it will attract as many international students and, of course, international partners. That's one of the things that keep going on in the entire international relation office. You know, to attract more students, more universities, and it's a fact that we should internationalize more our courses. So thank you for your effort, your interest and
Mm.
motivation to offer these courses in our university. And thank you again for your presentation. It was fantastic. It's a great opening for our international affairs. So on behalf of the International Direction of International Relations, we want to thank you, Elsa. Um, Maybe Carlos would like to say something. He just turned on the
No, no,
camera, but
was a great presentation, Elsa, in both lines. I think in this Chilean situation and internationalization process. So, thanks very much for collaborate with us and inspire another faculties to be involved in international dimension. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos and Agustin, and thank you to everyone who attended today, taking the time to be with us. This has really been an amazing year. I never expected to be incorporating so many international components on Zoom, and it really has opened up so many doors that I did not imagine. So it's very motivating, especially moving forward with the COIL project with Professor Madhu in the United States. So thank you all for attending and your interest in the topic, and my pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation. I really enjoy these instances to collaborate with international educators.